Hello everyone, this is the 9th two-hour interview I recorded some time ago with Shaun Attwood. Shaun, we almost lost him there, didn't we? Now he pops up all over the place. I'm even filling in for him this November, hosting, presenting and fulfilling completely one night only live at a hotel on the Isle of Man, the shipping destination for booze hounds and a welcome to any three-legged men. Episode 9 seems to be timed well as I recount some of my Afghanistan adventures as well as wandering all over the place as usual. Enjoy it.
We have the return of our most prolific guest on the True Crime Podcast. This is episode 9 of his story of being incarcerated across 5 continents, being on death row twice, escaping from death row in Thailand. And we did do a series during the lockdown with David that had to be deleted. But I'm going to urge people, if they want to see this highly humorous, off-the-cuff, freestyling, stand-up kind of at-home comedy that we did about what was going on around the world. If you want to see, I think there's about 7 or 8 episodes of them, an hour long each. They're on David's channel.
Yes, it's just called One to One because it's you and me really wandering off topic. I tell you what, you might be wondering I'll let you continue with your introduction in a minute, but why I'm wearing this.
We can't talk about why people are wearing these things because on this channel, enough said. But
no, it's to protect me from offensive remarks.
Offensive remark protector. That is an offensive remark protector.
It is. And from time to time, I might slip it back in place. But audio clarity is what we aim for. But you'll see it come on at points where I feel I need protection. Hello, everyone. I'm back. And who am I? David McMillan.
He might not be big and muscular and tattooed, but he's got the devil in his eyes. And let me just give a recap of where we are with David. Installment 8 finished with David in the throes of Hyderabad prison.
Hyderabad, yes.
Hyderabad. Another inmate had approached David with his lips sewn together as part of a hunger strike. He wanted David to sew his own lips together and show solidarity in his hunger strike, which David declined. David was then summoned to a meeting with the prison superintendent. Not knowing what he was getting into, he attended the meeting, and present at the meeting was his lordship, an ally of David from the killing fields of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and his lordship has brought to the prison a cake and 30 armed men who could basically just wipe out the prison administration at any moment, and the prison administration are kissing the rings. So, thanks for coming back on.
It's great to be back here. I've missed this. I mean, it's extraordinary that you moved the entire studio up to Mount St. Helens. It's obviously a very safe place to be these days. And I don't know how you found the staff to actually break it down brick by brick, but it's, apart from the odd volcanic rumble, it seems safe. And good to be back here. And I should say to people who've just stumbled in on number 9, because number 9's a nice number, that I'm in a Pakistan prison because in my early 40s by then, for over 20 years, smuggling across different continents. And I'd been imprisoned in Bangkok, but I didn't like that because they were going to kill me with a machine gun. And I escaped and then fled to... through to Singapore and then to Balochistan, which is in Pakistan, and I was under the protection of my old friend. You referred to his lordship, Mir Jahan Magsi, of the Magsi clan. And I'd actually met him back in the, 15 years earlier, crossing over into Afghanistan. And that was when the Russians were playing a bit of mischief there. But they learned, didn't they, Shaun, that Russians they may be, but tribal badlands is not the place to be.
They didn't learn from the British incursion in the previous century.
That's true. We had two great Afghan wars that didn't work out very well.
Didn't they leave a few survivors? And one head of the British came back after they'd all been wiped out. Talking about
Yes, there was one, I think, who crawled back. I mean, I must say, Shaun, though, if I'd been the last survivor in any operation and I'd crawled back, my backers might be a little bit suspicious as to why I was alive at all. My story might be doubted. And doubts are what one has to keep about you at all times. So I ended up retired again and rebuilt yet another life after having reconstructed about 5 of them. This time back in London, a nice mews house, slightly mad but irresistible girlfriend, Eloise, who knew nothing at all of my adventures. They were just, she described herself as too fatsy squeak. I think she meant a mouse. To deal with anything. You know, Eloise saw her, dropped into one of the flats unexpectedly, and I had about 3 passports, different names, same face. And she went to open it, and then she closed it again. Go ahead and look, I gambled. Oh no, I might see something that would alarm me, and probably would, but still. No, she knew nothing of that. And I'd returned, despite the retirement, into Pakistan, ended up in some trouble there, fishing out one of Nurjan's little nephews, who'd ended up being, some debt was owed. They're all smugglers. He's down on the Makran coast, running off to Dubai, and the nephew was taken because of an unpaid debt. As is the way with kidnappings in that part of the world, if whoever's invited you for the long dinner, as we'll call it, if they don't get satisfaction, they'll sell you on to somebody else who might be able to do better, and on and on. And little Iftikhar was about to be volunteered into I think an attack on Mazar al-Sharif up north, which was a bit like the way the Russians dealt with a lack of tanks and armaments in the Second World War against the Germans. The first wave were, prisoners, we'll call them. Yeah, if they weren't prisoners the day before that, they were now, and they just went out there armed with nothing but a prayer book, I suppose. So he ended up safely enough. I bought him back for a pretty good price. I got Iftikhar back for about $5,000. And I was pretending to be buying antiquities because there was quite a bit of digging up, as you can imagine, some Gandhar and stuff. And the antiquities cost me more, but I left them over there. God knows what happened to them. But found myself in front of my old nemesis, Bill Schenkman from the DEA, thrown back into a prison and facing a death penalty in the new anti-narcotics court, which is, there's worse things, I suppose, but the worst part about it, the court really didn't operate, didn't exist. So on top of that, over a dispute with how much bribe money should be paid in Karachi Central Jail, I was disappeared to Hyderabad, thrown into the Bund ward, the locked ward, and left there to rot. But I didn't mind it. The solitary was a little hard to tell night from day, but I don't know. I think people in the current climate will kind of understand that there are some benefits to being compelled to have time on your own.
It's good for the soul.
It is, and you get to kind of design the house you never built and all of that thing. Though I had some things to consider. You can imagine after a 20-year battle, I'm not really making money anymore, but just staying ahead and paying off to keep out of crises that come up. But the big break, and as we left it in last episode, number 8 on your channel, my old friend Nurjan had turned up at the prison and all would be well. So,
if you want to see the previous episodes, go down in the description box below this video is a link to the previous episodes, and also a link to David's channel on YouTube, which I urge you to subscribe at. Come on, let's get him up to 10,000 subs at least here soon. And also links to his books, Escape and Unforgiving Destiny.
Yep, they're around. And a German version of Escape will soon be about. I don't know. Anybody out there in Germany follow all this nonsense? Well, I think there are a few I hear from. So what to do next there? It didn't absolutely solve the problem.
Was there a file in the cake?
No, it was one of those very gooey cakes that come from, in Pakistan, the bakeries have a section which are kind of for weddings and well, really wedding services are the only big parties they have in public. It's very rare that people will throw a block party in Pakistan, and India to a lesser degree, a bit more fun there. So weddings are the big thing, and they have the shops sell a lot of very sticky, sugar-heavy, cream-rich, slightly rancid within a couple of days cakes. A bit like, have you ever heard of a bonboniere shop?
I've not.
Bonboniere, people, is an Italian idea where everything to do with christenings, weddings, and special occasion birthdays is sold. It's little dolls, sweets. I like going there just to be able to say, is this the bonboniere shop? It's got a good ring to it, hasn't it?
Like Anna Banana.
Yeah. But I was allowed freedom of the city of Hyderabad jail, not the city itself, but it was like a city. It held about 2,500, so I roamed about. Now, as you mentioned before, Byron, who had been feeding me while I was locked up there, he was the one who'd been on hunger strike. He was not the only one I found that had done that. The tradition is, foolishly, I thought, well, you just don't eat the food they give you and that's it. But it's not. What goes along with it, you have to have a certain amount of beatings every day. And the sewing of the lips, yeah. But I'll come to that in a minute. But the first bunch of people I met as I roamed about Hyderabad was two big political leaders of a Sindhi nationalist party. Now, Sindh province is where Karachi is, and Karachi city has its own party, the MQM. But the nationalists kind of want an independent state of Sindh. As you know, when India was broken up, lots of different groups, I mean, Sindh has its own language, Sindhi, wanted their independence. Now, these two guys were in on, well, most of the political party heads were in on murder charges. They found that was the only thing that would hold them in prison. They'd very rarely be convicted of it. But as I've said to people over the years, a couple of important things to know about being arrested in India, Pakistan is one, you'll be tortured for a confession. Now, that's grim, but it actually doesn't matter what you tell them, providing you don't tell them anything that's true. Confessing, horribly after a massive breakdown, don't do it on round one of the beatings, but try and avoid the electricity, that's for sure. You then say, all right, this is the truth, and they'll note it down, but it can never be used in a courtroom. No court there will accept it. And all the proceedings are in English. That is a great and useful legacy. it sounds. I know it's very unpopular to say anything good might have come out of a colonial era, but in the perception of the people there, they regard that the tradition of the courts was relatively honest. The British magistrates who ran them, were they fair? I'm sure not as fair as their wistful memories of the old people remember. But I suppose on a dull day, a magistrate might give a poor man a bit of justice just to make himself feel better, or something to talk about to Memsahib when he got home while he was beating the servants. So there was the idea that the court should be reasonably honest. But they held these two big nationalist leaders, and there was a limit to what they could do to torment them. The usual practice was to disappear them. They would go to holding cells or dungeons around the major cities. And these two guys, there was kind of a Napoleonic little one with dark hair and a kind of big beefy one. I think he was the sergeant at arms of the nationalists. They told me that when they were taken in and disappeared, their form of breaking them down was to swaddle them from head to toe in heavy bandages, clothing, a hood, which had no eye holes, nothing like that. Heavy mittens, not with even fingers in them, like oven gloves, and loads of wrappings around the feet, and then in the solitary cell by themselves, not together.
Like cook them alive, basically.
Kind of, yeah. It must have been kind of cozy in there, yeah, for sure. But it was a curious thing to meet them in the prison because they were so highly respected. Around where I was living, in a chair, one morning the chairs were brought, a little table was set up, and then they were ushered in, followed by a small retinue of people. And a couple of their badashi, the servants, were carrying food for me. Introduced themselves, David, here's some food. We've heard about you from Nurjan, that you're here. Now, Nurjan's Baluchi, but a nationalist and well respected for the great September 30 massacre, when over 100 people were killed in the street. A matter of pride? Well, perhaps fear and respect seem to go hand in hand there. But when I got to know them, the little one told me that while they were swaddled up one night, a guard had taken pity on them, and it was in the middle of the night, so nobody was around. He led them out from their cells. He didn't dare take everything off so they could breathe the air, but just lifted the cowling over their faces so they could get a sense of the night. And the little guy said, well, he took off the bandages around my feet, and so my bare feet he led us over to where there was some grass. And he said he could feel every blade of that grass, every droplet of moisture, the aroma of the night earth as it suppurated the smell rising from the ground. Now, this was 5 years earlier, but he remembered virtually every sensation across his feet that had. So it gave me some idea of what the extremes of sensory deprivation were like. As I've said before, if you're foolish enough to ask yourself a question, and your viewers might be wondering, what would it be like if I was arrested here? Or what would it be like if I was imprisoned in a foreign country? And people watch things like Locked Up Abroad, Banked Up Abroad to get some idea of that. But I think you need the texture, the smell, and the fear to go with it. And Hyderabad also had quite a mixture of other bits of driftwood that came in. Somebody in a cell near me was a notorious forger, and he even had restrictions on what he could be served to eat. He was not allowed to have boiled potatoes or potatoes of any kind.
Why?
I know, I asked myself that. He, if given a potato, would cut it in half and with a blade etch out the facsimile of a rubber stamp, an official rubber stamp. Get some ink from somewhere and then get his own bail papers. And that's the second lesson about that part of the world. Everyone, no matter how grave the crime, must be given bail after 2 years. It came down through a series of higher court challenges when cases were going on just forever, up to 20 years, and nothing ever happening with them. I suppose part of the reason nothing ever happened with them was each side were killing their own witnesses. That does tend to slow the proceedings a bit. So then I was in a dormitory there in Hyderabad where I got to meet some sort of country folk, 2 or 3 groups of them in for honor killings, which, if you don't know what, there's no honor whatsoever connected with it. Conceivably, family embarrassment as a daughter is accused or a wife is accused of doing something inappropriate. Like, what? Looking, seeing, being looked at, something like that. I mean, the crazy thing is nothing necessarily would ever form the basis for the offended family's anguish. Okay, if the girl was going to run off with and have a love marriage, that's a set expression. Was it a love marriage like that? This is a rarity, not the arranged marriages. Now, these hillbillies were, they'd killed the daughter in the family. And the guy I spoke to had killed his sister. And I asked him if he felt bad about that. And yeah, he came to think it wasn't such a good idea. But, well, not really country imbeciles by comparison with this is their own perception. I don't mean the country people were imbeciles, but even within their own groups, they were considered that. But the most interesting people at Hyderabad were a bunch of Russians I found there. Now, the design of the place was peculiar. It was mostly huge grounds and kind of nice, some gardens, parks within the jail. Strange. You can Google it up and look at the aerial shots of it at Hyderabad. Don't get it confused with the Hyderabad in India, but the Pakistan one. And I don't know whether it's visible on it, but it kind of had Greek columns and long curb patio things. Now, amongst all of that were all these European faces. And my guide said, no, they're the Russians, meet them. And you might wonder why a bunch of Russians, I think there was 6 there at the time, 6 left out of a group of 10. They'd been in for about 9 years. Their leader was Andres, and he was, this was back in the Soviet era, before Glasnost and the wall coming down and all of that. So I'm guessing, and I found out to be true, that to be a Russian street gang back in the Soviet era was a pretty tough calling. You had to be able to hold your ground. So the gang, there were about 12 of them in Moscow. They all got into trouble, sent off to prisons, but they were so bad when left together, they were broken into 2 groups. One sent off to I think it was Chem 128. This is part of the Russian prison system, which has whole cities which are devoted to nothing but prisons. Sure, they're grim and vicious, but they have their own kind of social life. They have a women's prison attached to it. Some of the inmates are married to the women there, and they have visiting days and all of that. Anyway, Andreas found himself with 6 of his compatriots in Chem 128, I think it was. No, Prem 128. And he tried lots of things in there to bring the gang back together, but nothing worked. So he executed quite an interesting plan. Andreas and the boys there escaped from that prison. And did they flee into the hinterlands of Siberia? No. That would be probably certain death from exposure or many other things. After all, that's why they're in Siberia. But they went to the airport and hijacked a commercial Tupolev 128, I think it was. Did they flee the country then? No. Not for a tough Moscow street gang. He demanded that the plane fly to another prison city and exchange passengers for the rest of his gang. Yeah.
No way.
Now this,
Wow.
I've often wanted to write that story because of, as their numbers dwindled over the years, because you can imagine the authorities were not readily going to hand over prisoners out of a jail in exchange for the lives of passengers on a plane. Well, yes, they changed their mind after the negotiator who came on board was the first lot were killed, and then the next negotiator announced that through hand signals through the aircraft that they should go ahead. Something wrong with the radios. It wasn't entirely that. The negotiator was dead, and they were moving his arms and face around like my weekend at Bernie's, keeping him alive. And there's lots more to that. But
please tell us the lots more.
Well, they managed to get off the ground after leaving a small amount of carnage, but keeping enough passengers on board. Have you ever been on a Russian flight?
No.
Well, I suppose this might be something that one could take on it, really, because the splatter from the onboard snacks. It's usually a bucket with oranges on it, and the seatbelts don't work. The passengers are a hardy bunch anyway. They first were going to fly to Gaddafi's Libya, but that turned out to be, well, they were unwelcome. After all, he was a bit friendly with the Russians, as you recall. So they flew to General Zia al-Haq's Pakistan. He was a general, as it sounds, and he'd taken over the government by putting the Prime Minister, Benazir Bhutto's dad, on trial for, one of the made-up murders or somebody's death, and actually executing him. That was unusual. He was hanged. Now, Zia, the general, didn't like the Americans, but did some business with them. Didn't like the Russians because he was on the other Afghan side, not wanting the Russians around. So the Moscow street gang, Andreas thought that was the place to go, and the one place in the world. There was a little confusion with the two Hyderabad's, as you can imagine. And they touched down there because Hyderabad, and it is today, remains so, is the Stansted of Pakistan airports. That is, the place that hijacked planes go to land. And you will have noticed that all planes with trouble get diverted to Stansted. That's because they've got a crew ready to deal with all of that, who live there, waiting for trouble. I would say to any hijacker, take the train, But if you do find yourself having to choose between airports, try to avoid Stansted, but you won't be able to. Anyway, in fact, when the plane landed, Andreas demanded proof that he was in the right Hyderabad. And from the Pakistan side, this was quite, something to break the monotony of a long, hot summer. The one who first went on board was a very senior inter-services intelligence, their CIA kind of spook, and another big chief, but they were in civilian clothes or shalwar kameez, and they just didn't have the uniform, so Andreas didn't really believe him. And then he had a little Moscow street idea: show me your cigarettes. A man's cigarette packet will identify where he's from. Unfortunately, as I said, these were very high-up people, all imported Dunhill. Anyway, that was settled. So, what to do with them? Okay, sentence them to death. Yes, but no, but yes. And the general commuted that to life. And then they dragged on in the courts. And they wore out their welcome in Karachi by getting into fights with just about everybody. They stood their ground, these Russians. They wouldn't pay. Well, they didn't have any money. So the only option was to fight. During the previous years, they'd killed 16 other inmates, 4 guards, and it really surprised me that they were still alive. We're all civilized in the West, but if a prisoner kills guards, he's not likely to live, is he? He will meet with an accident. Another inmate will be elevated in some way by getting rid of him. It's not likely he'd survive, but to kill 4 of them. Threw one of them off a building that they'd climbed up to. Now, they'd been on hunger strikes, and a lot of them bore the telltale marks of the scars on the upper lip. You know what? I never asked. I meant to. Oh, yes, it was. They used cotton, if you're wondering. There was no catgut or surgical suture material. So they must have got infected. What? Best not to have a moustache for that. But they would, to try and compel them, they would just tear away, the guards would hold them down and tear away those stitches and force feed them with a device they had made up. It was a steel contraption which had a kind of allowed a tube down there, but the steel thing held your jaw open so the tube could get down inside. Now, as I was listening to Andreas recount the little gang's history, I did notice that he had gaps in his teeth where would have been his first and second molar, top, bottom, on both sides. And that was because when the steel device was shoved in his mouth, rather than take that, he crushed his own teeth into the steel, shattering them, and sealed it off from the rubber tube. Well, that did impress his captors somewhat, and they ended up with at least their own little patch in the prison. But still, Shaun, we won't shilly-shally in Hyderabad prison any longer.
I'm gripped by all this.
Because I had to bid them a fond farewell and get back to the court, which I did. My judge welcomed me back because it was he who, from his side, apart from Nurjan, who'd done the actual magic, had brought me, and he really pressed the Karachi prison as to where I'd been taken. He threatened the superintendent, the equivalent of head warder or governor, with being imprisoned for contempt unless I was produced, and actually got him down to the courtroom. So produced I was. but Karachi Central Jail, and I had a brief hearing, lots of courtesies with the judge. I got rid of my old lawyer, Zahor Baruch, because I'd hired him, by the way, because people might remember I'd met him in the prison. He'd been FIR'd. FIR is first incident report. It's something you go to a police station and buy, along with other treats. You can get that a case registered against somebody, and they go and get arrested, and then they have to be back. It's a way of annoying somebody else. And many lawyers were in the prison, and Zahor Baluch was one of them. A bit of a bad reputation, but I wasn't too fussy then. I told him I wasn't going to pay him anything much in advance, a few thousand. But he wasn't really he was trying to cheat too much. So I switched to Rana Shamim. And I mentioned his name because he's now a judge in the High Court in Pakistan. He's come along in the world. But my judge was, perfectly, there was nothing against me. You might recall that I was there because of the crazed babblings of the great failed boxer from Liverpool, Billy Green, who, when in trouble, having done a drug run that he was supposed to find couriers for out of greed and to build up a little family palace in the Philippines with his wonderful wife, had landed himself in trouble, and the best way out of trouble is to get me into it. So I was tangled with him. I couldn't do much about him because he'd let it be known that if he disappeared, it would be my doing. If he slipped on a bar of soap in the shower there in the prison, that would be his doing. So I had the court case continue, but not from Karachi Central. I went to a different prison, Landi.
Before that prison, then, did you interact with the Russians?
Yeah. It's always been, they were a little out of date, I thought, but we exchanged contacts, but they didn't really have any or care of Prem 128, addresses or anything. But oddly enough, our paths would cross again, as fate would have it. And Andreas was transferred back to Karachi to be sent back. Oh, his life sentence there, it was all reduced to 10 years. They were getting to release. The Russians were going to come and pick them up. They were even taken to the airport once. But now we had arranged to let the airport officials have them get onto any journey of their choice rather than go back to Siberia. But we couldn't get him a passport. I was trying to get a camera in, but I kind of had my hands full with my own case. And then I went over to this other prison. But
so you were helping them then?
Oh, yeah. Well, why not? I mean, they'd proved their mettle. And not only that, I hadn't done much in Russia, and I thought, these guys are going to be somewhere one day. This great Soviet bloc won't last forever. Nothing ever does. And it might be good to have some contacts there that could bite through a steel device, because I had no doubts about that. The thing with business in Russia, in there, certainly in the old days, and much so since things opened up, we'll call it the Putin era. The distinguishing thing between the state and crooks is a pretty thin line, and a lot of the old KGB network became owners of things, and all the oil people you've heard of had connections there. But there was kind of what you'd say a big gulf between the businessman crooks and the street ones. But they like to keep their honor and keep in touch with each other. So I thought my way in was probably safer from the street up than from the big people down. I couldn't fight the people from the top down. I mean, I've I know people in London today who are still fighting over money put into Russian oil deals. And they have cases in London, but it comes to nothing, the civil courts. And it wouldn't matter if it came to something anyway, it's unenforceable. This is the top-down strategy of the underworld. If you imagine we wanted to go into, not that we would, but into cocaine in South America, you'd think, well, go in at the top, with the big guys. But that's not really the smart move. You're not at the soft underbelly of the workings of the machine. If you're back down at my most happy, that is, peaceful, unannoying South American contact was a kind of slightly, what would you call her? A society hostess, really. She held parties and had a lot of friends, but she was also a distributor of the coke in Cali, between dealer to dealer within there. So dealers would come and buy a kilo and then break it up and be sold in that area. Now, that's the kind of person you want. You don't want people who can start talking about international things. They want to know your business, who's flying. They'll find out who you meet at your hotel. They'll get in their hooks in. And they will also, oh, where do you come from? London. Oh, well, just a minute. This week, 31,525 pounds a kilo, if I'm not wrong. And they're not wrong. So they want you to be buddies, Shaun. Yeah, they if you're doing something and foolish enough to tell them the slightest thing about it, they'll say, well, you've got 5 kilos going back. Throw in another kilo of mine, will you? It won't fit. Oh, we've got something for you that will put the whole 6 in there. And suddenly you realize you're not working for yourself anymore. I mean, if you say, well, I'll take your kilo back and I'll give it to you in London, there we are. Everybody happy? Yeah, well, why don't you sell it? Oh, I don't have it. Yeah, well, we do. So you call these people, they'll buy it. It's lost. It's all gone. But if you're, I think many, many years ago in the depths of despair in Bangkok when I was facing execution, and I just spent a decade in an Australian prison and life was a wreck. A complete scallywag conman from Boston said to me a bit of advice I never really understood at first. David, if you want to free yourself, you have to, no matter how foreign and alien it seems to you, you have to love the people in some way. It didn't mean anything to me then, but I translated it as to understand, at least, appreciate the world as it is on the ground. And like I say, with the society hostess in Cali, hers was a world where I could roam around and not be under threat, not become a manipulated target. And if we go across the other part of the world, the same sort of applies in a much more complex way in India, Pakistan. So I kept the Russian contacts, but with my own case and it was coming to a conclusion. The great Billy Green was going to plead guilty and would had a guarantee of no more than about 4 years. And this was for 5 kilos of heroin, so he was doing quite well, really. He would take my lawyer, so I had him heavily under control. I would be found not guilty. A policeman was the investigating officer, not the ugly big boss, Baboosh, Ahmed Baboosh, my torturer. He was too high up to be involved, but we had a real struggle finding, when I say an honest policeman, one that wasn't so blatantly corrupt that he'd sound honest. And when he was convinced to be asked the question, is this McMillan wanted in Thailand for anything? He only had to say, not that I know of. He was trembling when he had to give that in court. But it was quite good. The judge thought, he knows otherwise, but at least he's relatively honest. When all the other liars I have in this court sail through it like they're picking up an Academy Award. I'd like to thank all the little people. The lies I tell here today are the best I've ever had. But that wouldn't. I spent about 3, perhaps 4 months at Landy Prison. When I was thrown in there, the prison boss there had big ambitions. Again, 25,000 US. I don't know what it is, Shaun. They always come up with the same number. They've never had it, never seen it, don't know what it looks like, but they like it. So I was given kind of bad treatment when I sort of bought my way up a little bit from the bottom, got a court order that he couldn't argue with, because I'd heard he was extremely ruthless, this prison boss. He got the offcasts of the great Karachi Central Jail, which had all the celebrities. Landy had nobodies, really, and had a very small B class for these are the guys with their own servants and their own guard and so on. So it was quite a small section. And I was there with an Air Force captain on a charge of, I think 2.5 tons of hashish going into Canada, some brown heroin as well. Can't remember the rest. Was he innocent? Who cares? But he certainly was naive in the business. He'd had some, without a doubt, he'd had some Canadian connections. But as cellmates go, he was quite good. There was a Christian tax collector in our little enclave. And he was, had been accused of corruption. He was in there. So it was a very kind of peaceful little spot. Compared to Hyderabad dungeon, it was fine. We had our cooks. And I'd walk around the prison kind of having a look about. There was nobody much there. But I did see, I spied through a window, and my little minions, the people who do my shopping and so on, would... now, bear in mind, I'm going to, just to get the picture clear, I'm in a jail, but I'm going to court. I'm also B class, which is the upper class of the, not a lesser. A is only for the political cases. And a disadvantage. But the B class, you have no handcuffs when you get taken to court. You get your own van, and you pay the driver, of course. And you can wander around the courtroom, go to the shops across the way. Send your guard, for that matter, if you're a bit busy. I usually give him a list, and he'd wander over. So, and I think I've mentioned to you before, what would be the disadvantage of me just melting into the crowd there? Oh, wait a minute. No, I'd have to get somebody to at least pick me up from the courtroom and drive off with them. Would that be good? No. I would effectively be imprisoning myself with the people who picked me up. So that I wanted an acquittal. I wanted to be a free man. I wanted to be able to walk the streets of Karachi. So I held out for the case. But there was another Englishman in the jail, and his name was also David. He was a Londoner and had been a diamond dealer before getting somehow tangled up in a case that involved a couple of tons of hashish that had a long history. Some London villains had invested some of their spare cash in trying to organize a pretty big hash shipment from there. It had become, well, they hadn't learnt what viewers here should have learnt by now. You have to be Johnny on the spot. You have to be on the ground. You have to take your money there. They'd send money there. And like throwing money out of an open aeroplane door, it rains down on the lucky beneficiaries. And they say, when called, why isn't my hashish ready? What? Everything's ready. Just come. And of course, when they get there, there's nothing done because they should have showed up and paid for themselves. So this David, the diamond dealer, was apparently there. And my spies also told me that he was in the clutches of I keep thinking he was Baluch, but he was Akbar Shah, that was his name, yeah. He was a very well-known hashish smuggler or arranger of deals. But he was an inveterate gambler, sad to say. And Akbar Shah could organize, should you want it, shipping containers of hashish to come out of Pakistan. He could arrange, should you choose to do it, buyers in Amsterdam, transport across Europe. He could do lots of things. But if there was a deal to be done at 10 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't give Akbar Shah the $500,000 the night before. He would leave the hotel room, go down to a casino, gone. So he'd got him, Akbar, this David the diamond dealer had been sent by the London villains to be the man on the ground. Why they would send a man with no experience of any of this is beyond me. But poor David lapped it up. He was quite impressed with the London villains. And admittedly, in their robbing days, this particular group, and I won't name them, a few are still alive, they were pretty good. They'd get big loaders and lifters and pick up security vans off the ground and take them away to play their merriment with them. They almost couldn't lose a trial. They had juries fixed up. They had Henry Milner, the great fixer of trials back in the 70s and 80s. So Henry, not a bad lawyer, retired now. Good lawyer, really, but he had just a way of bringing people together, shall I say that, and acquittals would follow. He got himself a good name. I actually used him for, he offered his services to me for the extradition case that Thailand launched upon me a couple of years ago when they wanted to get me back. Anyway, I heard of this. This David was stuck in a room with Akbar and being slowly leached. I heard that his family were sending money, and it was bad. So he'd been there for months. I invited him for a Sunday lunch, sent the servants around to get him. He came into our little walled enclave, and I realized he couldn't tell out of the three of us, the Air Force captain, the Christian tax collector, and myself, who was the English guy, because I'd so become part of that world. I was wearing a white shalwar kameez, and I think I'd grown a moustache, which is not always a good idea to blend in too closely. I had a perfectly genuine fake passport challenged at an airport once at KLM by a guy who saw that moustache and said, "This is a Pakistani," because I had a suntan as well, and started peeling away at the thing. Yeah. It wasn't a very good passport. If I may demonstrate, you do not want a passport that when somebody in an official position starts peeling away the top layer and your face is there. That doesn't happen to passports normally. You need protection stronger than that. Yeah. But that was something else. It was a minor tragedy. So David couldn't tell who his host was. And when I came up to him and said, "Hello, David, most welcome to our humble little Sunday kitchen here," just to hear an English voice, he couldn't speak. He was choked with emotion, and then hugged me. I suppose Londoner to Londoner, or whatever I was at the time. He had been away from anything that was familiar for so long. He'd been having to deal with things. I'd forgotten, because I was kind of used to it, how you always hear, and you've had probably many people in this seat saying how difficult it is when they're in some foreign place. The stress of being able to. I could understand why he got all choked up, but I said, "No, come over and sit down. Gin and tonic. You're safe here. You can be yourself." Well, I heard his story. It was certainly worth a lunch. He'd arrived. He'd been taken to a warehouse. A sheet had been lifted under which supposedly the 2 tons of hash was. Oh, no, I can hear footsteps outside. Remind you of something? Oxford Street on a shell game? Yeah. Whether there was any hash, who knows? And where had he been staying? Some discreet guest house, the apartment of a friend? No. At the Hyatt Hotel. Now, in Karachi, there's about 3 nominally 5-star hotels. Whether any of them are, I don't know. But that was definitely, it had the atmosphere, all of those. If you go to the lobby, there are so many spies and vested interests, and it looks like Rick's Cafe Americain in Casablanca. There's so many people with something to sell or trade or buy or use you for. So it was little wonder that half a dozen competing Pakistan agencies were all over him like a rash. But that was not enough to get him arrested. Something else, some unseen hand had, because normally it's just the Western mug that goes in a thing like this, or maybe some driver or something like that. But for the Akbar as well to be dragged in, and they're all facing trial. And of course, David's asking me, should I sell the family home? Akbar says, I'll need 20,000 now. It's got to be here in a couple of weeks. Look, and I repeated those things. You get bail in 2 years. Take your time. These cases never end. They go on forever. I mentioned that banker who was in at Karachi, I think, at another time. He never wanted his case to ever end. He wanted it to last until he did. He wanted his deathbed to be in the palatial house he'd built within Karachi Central Jail with its air conditioning and satellite dishes and comforts. David, I said, don't do it. Just don't do anything. And look, I know, I told him, somebody is bound to come along and say, don't trust Akbar Shah, but use your own judgment. This is his record. Look at anybody's situation. It's his country. He will take care of himself first. Just take it easy. Relax. More beans. Always liked dal. Don't know. It's simple, but it's good. Liked it ever since first isolation block in Karachi Central. So, did he take my advice, you're wondering? No, he didn't. He went back and kind of panicked, and then started actually talking about other businesses that we might do. Look, one thing at a time. We're here now. This is our business. Met some of the other people there. A couple of shoe walkers. Those are the people with who take. Now, you wouldn't think it'd be very profitable, would you, to take 1.5 kilos in each shoe? That makes a very heavy shoe. I mean, they're a bit Gary Glitter by the time they start to hold 1.5 kilos. Shuffle through there. There was one there. This guy used to be a beachcomber in the Caribbean. He used to pick up about 1 kilo a year or 1.5 kilos, just like driftwood coming to shore on the islands there. The currents would take spilled cargo from the Caribbean, South America, Florida route, bits that had fallen over, been thrown over once the authorities approached. But it would drift up on shore. I mean, that you can imagine that'd be a nice holiday, wouldn't it? Viewers living on a Caribbean island, combing the beaches, stumbling across little bricks of decorative driftwood, I mean. They've got minds. I mean, what are they thinking, these people? So I went to my trial, and it was a very nice day when I was acquitted. Judge saying there wasn't a shred of evidence against me, and I am free to go. Hallelujah, brothers and sisters. I am free to go. But the way it works, and it works this way here too, you can be acquitted. You actually go back to the prison to get released from there once the prison's hold papers arrived. The release papers arrived, but I had to get... oh, yes. I'd been double charged with the same thing, and the same drug case was in the anti-narcotics court and the customs court. I was acquitted from the customs court, but the anti-narcotics court case would never end. And that's not what I didn't really want. I couldn't get there because there was no court, so I had to get bail. Now, for a foreigner to get bail in Pakistan in a death penalty case is not a snap. But and here's another thing. It's you have to have local guarantors to put up their house. They want property from a local man, and the local man's only going to do it if the money he's given is greater than he could lose. Here's the problem. And this is the essence, the classic problem there, and dealing everywhere in that part of the world. If I send somebody with the money and they give it to the man, it won't happen. Why should he? He's got the money. You can't. When somebody virtually have to go there, buy a house, and then become a resident. I mean, that was all too time consuming. And who was my first audience to this discussion? It was the Air Force captain. He said, "I know exactly what you mean. You can't give the money to anybody, because anybody who would take the money and not simply volunteer it, you couldn't trust. I'll do it for you," he said. So when I get released, he arranged his own bail. Now, what are the odds? What are the odds that somebody that you've met in a prison we got on well, will say, "I will put up," I forget what it was, the equivalent of about $20,000 in property, and I will have you released on it, and you're a foreign devil. I will come to you, Shaun, and you're in the middle of New Delhi or something, and I'll put my... And you've met... But the odds are remote, no?
Sounds too good to be true.
When it's too good to be true, when it's ridiculously too good to be true, sometimes it is. And it was. And he did.
Good grief, wow.
And I had my bail papers from the... it was the High Court that had issued them. My release was sent to Landy Prison, and nothing happened. "What papers?" says Mr. $25,000, the prison governor. "Don't know anything about them." He'd said to the guard from up there, came back and told me, he's saying, "Unless you give him this amount of money, you won't go anywhere." I was even brought, just to tease me, I was brought up the front with all the people being released that night. It happens about 6 o'clock. And they're all going. I'm the last one, sitting around there kicking my heels, not going anywhere. Now, here's the ingeniousness of local knowledge. The Air Force captain knew perfectly well that that prison governor would never let me go, ordinarily, unless a fair amount of money was paid over. So and if he came down, because they knew each other, of course, he'd been in there a year, this Air Force captain, the prison governor knew him backwards, he'd smell money. "Oh, you want the foreigner? Well, it's going to cost you $25." And what to do? So, who would you send, Shaun? Who would be best?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? To avoid paying money to him, who would you send? Someone who had something on him?
Yes, but time-consuming, and inevitably, somebody who had something on him would want almost the same amount of money that was in question. No, Air Force captain sent somebody we actually knew from. It was a priest.
A priest?
Imam. who was reasonably enough respected, but also to talk to, kind of bored and indifferent. He turned up and said to the prison boss, "I'm here for I can't even remember what name I was under. Dylan, I think.
Dylan.
I'm here for David anyway.
David Dylan.
Yeah, he's got bail. Yeah, well, it'll cost you some money." The priest said, "Well, I'll send the car away because I'm not paying anything. Nothing to do. I don't care whether I get him or not. He's got no family here. You can keep him forever." And now the prison boss knows he's going to get in trouble in the courts for not enforcing this order to some extent, only as much as he'd just have to avoid being summoned a few times. So the priest then says, "Look, give the guard 500 rupees and bring him over." Now it's almost like an insult. It's like £5. That this is how low this guy was, this prison boss. He takes the 500, puts it in his pocket, slaps his sergeant at arms around. "All right, let the priest have it." That's it. You know? And so I was out.
What was going through your head when you heard that was accepted, that deal?
Well, I didn't know anything about it because I wasn't in, I'd left my phone back
This
there.
was all at the behest of the Air Force guy. He organized it.
He did.
So you were told after you were released then, the deal. And were you impressed?
I was in the back of a little air-conditioned rust bucket. They might be crappy cars, but the air conditioning usually works. He said, the priest said, "Oh, it was touch and go that day." And he, I wasn't going to, I took several steps away back to the car, but I said, "Where's the Air Force guy?" "Oh, he's waiting for you, somewhere else, but he thought you might want a kind of night's rest after all of this first. Just see him tomorrow." which I would, because do you recall Robbie the Scot?
Which episode was that?
Well, he was a Scottish deal broker who found himself in Pakistan, and we first met, though I'd heard of his arrest. He was involved in arranging finance for the Gwadar oil pipeline from Gwadar port, which is along the coastline there, out in Nurjan's territory. And that financing for that came under some suspicion because it was billions. It was like $2.5 billion, the whole project. This Scottish guy, Robbie, was in the middle of it, arranging the finance. And had his own bit of extraordinary misfortune. A couple of City of London police had been at the Pearl Continental Hotel just over some other matter, almost like on holiday, busman's holiday. And he'd ended up in the prison, and we'd met and swapped stories and everything like that. But he himself had been bailed out on the $2.5 billion case, which was quite a good bit of engineering on his part. So he picked up very quickly because you might recall the prison boss from Karachi Central had sent me over to this newcomer, Robbie. "Foreigner come, big money, oil pipeline, 25,000. Stop it. And it was like, I don't know, 2,000 rupees cash and then another 20. And I said to Robbie, "Just slow down on the paying." "Yeah, but I know the way it is here. You can, Yeah. It's even more so in here." So, but he was out. He was released. He had like the floor of the Avari Hotel, and he was just moving to Clifton Beach, which is the name of a suburb of Karachi. And as it sounds, it's along the beachfront, a lot of high-rise apartments. And he was moving to the penthouse. He knew through another Air Force contact who'd been in the prison, my Air Force man, and so they all knew each other. In fact, during the move from the Avari Hotel into the Clifton penthouse, by the time I arrived, whole lot of army guys and Air Force people, about 15 of them, were just lugging furniture up the lifts and transferring it over this new place. So Robbie said, well, why don't you stay in the apartment? It's got 6 rooms in there up the top, and they've all got their own bathrooms, so there's nothing in it.
Did your Air Force guy lose his property because you then disappeared, or did you already pay him more than the value of the property, so it didn't matter? That was in the agreement.
Oh, no, I paid nothing, ever. What happened was I didn't flee. I went to the High Court along with Robbie had organized 20 class action case against the double jeopardy ruling that says in their constitution, which was hastily drafted by a British civil servant during partition, it says that no one shall be put to trial over the same matters twice. And that ruling it was one of a series of all-purpose, ready-to-go constitutions that the British made and gave to a few countries. Oddly enough, and so it applied there. So I took that to the High Court, won the case, and was acquitted completely. So I was a free man.
Wow.
The man got his house back. It was freed from links up there, and everybody was happy. Oh, I rewarded them, in kind and in fashion. But I had, from the moment I refused to keep paying any more in Karachi Central, even over my telephone or any other damn thing, and I was disappeared to Hyderabad, I decided this will be the new way. I've sat here through 8 episodes, bribing my way, sprinkling money here. But at this stage, after 40 years in the field, endless wars, endless collapses, great rebuildings of life, everything being shattered again, I decided that, nope, the new way David's going to operate, I'm paying nothing. Nothing for the drugs, nothing for the contacts, nothing ever. Well, it's not entirely true. When a deal would go through, people would all get their rewards. But I didn't want anything to look like anything before. I wanted to go back 40 years to the hippie world in a funny kind of way, where money wasn't argued out or nailed down. And I ended up doing business with people in even in that part of the world where no money was ever mentioned. And it even puzzled me. I would say, what are your expectations for this when it hits the West? What do you think you're going to get? It's up to you, David. I never worry anymore. And I'd probably pay maybe more than the odds, but I like that. It was good. So there was really, okay, I suppose I could say this. Did I pay off my judge for the acquittal? Not exactly, but out of £15,000 that went to the lawyer, probably 5,000 paid for the Hajj pilgrimage of purification for the judge, because he'd just come back from his journey to Mecca. And Rana Shamim, my lawyer, said, David, it's a good day. He has been cleansed. He has been to Mecca. Praise, salutations to the Lord. And he came back in white. Is that significant? White is what today will be. He goes on a bit like this. So, again, I kind of like this thing of I'm not going to talk money anymore, and if you're the kind of person who wants to talk money, deal with somebody else. Okay, there were limitations to this as time went on, but because especially people from outside who didn't have a clue what anything was. But you can imagine it'd be quite a nice feeling going through completely illicit business without ever once having made an out loud agreement to do anything wrong, to break any law, and never mentioning any money. I imagine for the opposition, if they were ever monitoring things, it must have been very frustrating. But anyway, I didn't have to do anything very much at that time because I could put my feet up down the beachside and look over at the waves in Karachi port. And, oh yes, there was one other little wrinkle to it. What about the David the Diamond Dealer that I'd met there? And what did the Air Force captain want?
I used to have a catchphrase in some of my business dealings where I'd say, "I'll leave it up to your generosity." And I can't ever remember that going against my benefit.
Oh. You mean it was to your benefit?
It was to my benefit, yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I think it can be.
Yeah.
And in fact, it does show you, I think, the gulf.
People will lowball themselves.
Yeah, that's true. But it also shows the gulf of between the inexperienced and the experienced.
Yeah.
And also that when you meet somebody that, for whatever reason, knows his or her way around, the playing field. There's no hurry to deal with any of that.
Yeah.
So, people, some of our viewers, you'll be shocked to know, often make inquiries. How do I get into such and such a business? Something illegal, I'll do anything, I'll go anywhere. And the sad thing is it's a very different world these days. You can, on my own channel, I think I put out something recently about 10 smuggling devices, starting with the 1950s Grundig radio, to one that involved that's a transition in the way the world works, by going through being hit, having everything searched, having nothing on my body or internally, and yet still getting through. So from mere disguise to deflection in a massive way. In that one, the whole point of it is that look where we are now. Hardly the few people who travel by air, just as we're recording, only do so out of necessity, and there's some strong family need. You can imagine, is this good for smugglers, people up to mischief? I don't think so. Not only that, everything is so, even more information goes into the system as to who a passenger is. And that's going to be magnified even further with, if not medical records, certainly close and things about people that will be heavily known. Gone are the days when somebody can put on a new identity, like wearing a new suit. There's no background to it. There's no Facebook presence. There's no, and we know it exists, the Google advertising profile of the individual, all algorithm, no human involved, but it does mean that when you are anywhere near Instagram or Facebook, you uncannily get the ads for something you've been looking at.
Google keeps sending me emails now showing everywhere I've driven.
Yeah, no, they can do that. My phone. I use because I can't remember where the hell I was working. Also, the slumlords I work for. It's either CCTVs or slumlords covering up a mess, or somebody where they don't want a stranger running around with the keys to a place. No, not because it's illegal, it's just embarrassing, or they don't want anybody to know. So I'm the kind of person that comes in on that. But I can't remember where I've been. So Google Maps is perfect. Every month it says, David, look at your timeline. And I can watch, what the hell was that? I mean, it will offer you, if it hasn't got the address right, you can correct it. So you can even, I think it's great. I've got an alibi for everything for the last 2 years, every moment.
Going back to transactions then, did you have some people who did still say this quantity, this price, and then when you pay them, even if there's a few fake $20 bills in there, you're going to get some kind of
grief out of it.
Summons to a meeting the next day.
Well, it varies around the world. The payments are imbalanced, aren't they? Money going back to South America for goods or services, and money going back to Central Asia, the Middle East. The Gulf states are always very exacting. They work on margins, and it's not drugs particularly, but so they're kind of exacting. Somewhat greedier, and I found in South America, but mostly kind of one-upmanship on their next competitor. India, Pakistan, Thailand, kind of just happy that it was, more money than they've had before. And I've always tried to work so that my contacts or friends in a source place will have an elevation in life in some way, so that their position will move up from what they had before, and so it will always be better. It takes quite a greedy slob, doesn't it, to come out of some place and suddenly be able to afford a couple of houses and that trip to Europe, whatever, and then still want more on top. As soon as you see that sign, you're going to have trouble with that person. The most calculating, or the people who take the strongest offense at being out by any amount, whether in weight or in money, the Scandinavians. If you're a krona short in Sweden, you'll hear about it. I just said to somebody, look, that was underweight, but he'll make it up next time. But you can't do that. Why not? He didn't mean to. He just didn't have time to weigh anything. All right, but tell him not to do it. All right, you tell him.
So you're still you got acquitted then, and you're in the hotel.
Yes, I was in the hotel, but I moved into the penthouse down in Clifton, and yes, I have two things on my plate. Apart from the fact of not wanting to do anything, I'm kind of exhausted after all this. I've had Thailand to get out of, Karachi. The Air Force captain, we'd been discussing, when we were locked up together, what would be. He said, I can take you to a place where you will be your own law, where no one can touch you ever. Well, that's intriguing, isn't it? I didn't have anything really in mind.
You can be your own law.
Yeah. And I was trying to stop the diamond dealer from getting his wife, Jeanette, to sell the family home. And it didn't help having him on Akbar Shah's by the second, 20,000 a phone call phone in there, him crying on the other end, saying, making up stories about how terrible it was. Wasn't that bad? But the most interesting one was heading off in another little caravan out towards the borderlands again. Not with. I went to visit Nurjan, who'd been released again, but it was the Air Force captain who took me over to the Afghan border. And this was coming up to 2000. So this is kind of when Taliban are in early stages. There's still lots of groups still fighting over the bones and the wreckage of Afghanistan. But I could see, this is with hindsight, but I could see the sort of formation of groups of people that didn't seem to fit in with the cargo network. When I ended up with the Air Force captain, some kind of agency spook, I presume he worked for sometimes, for the ISI,
somebody who was an Afghani fixer of some sort, and we were in a kind of small town, and I don't know, there was something suffocating about it. They were very reluctant to let me wander about. I said, look, guys, I do that. That's something I always do, go for a wander. You can come with me or not, I don't care. But and I did, and I could see sort of some compounding, by which I mean there would be places that were a bit boarded up, and I did have a little peek at something, and I saw some people were playing around with peroxides and acids. It used to be the German rocket fuel. You mix two chemicals together and they blow up. They made some little crazy plane that was a rocket that it goes up there. This is called A stuff and B stuff, very carefully mixed together. And I couldn't conceivably think of what a group of young men, all dressed in black and, usual rifles lying around, but what their interest was in explosives. But I could see no real good would come of it. I would end up being, the Western contact, not so much, but I would be always prey to somebody or used by somebody. Or I felt like I was in that part of some movie where the audience is yelling, don't go in there, don't go in for that one. And it was very much like that. And oddly enough, I ran into, some weeks later, into Jeremy from the British High Commission in Karachi, who used to smuggle me in money to the courtroom. And I said to him, look, Jeremy, I've got my feet up at the moment, but I can see some groups of people who are certainly going to get under my feet, and from your guys' point of view, much worse so. They've been playing around with explosives, and not for the kind of blowing each other up. The only possible, I can't think beyond it, is if you wanted a liquid explosive that you could disguise getting through some checkpoint, whether that be as a body pack through to some security thing or an aeroplane. You interested at all in getting rid of my competition for me? We had a long chat about it, but he didn't do anything. I mean, it's not the first time that out of self-interest, I've pushed them in the general direction of, I guess what you'd say, extremist groups, and they never do anything about it. I don't know why it is. You'd think they'd show an interest. I'd like to think it was because their intelligence was better than mine, but I kind of don't think so.
Do you think they have a vested interest in allowing things to happen?
To some degree, yes. It's not unknown in British and American history where we let something turn into a mess so we can side with the winning faction or get our man in power or something like that.
Just watching Roman Empire now, where Commodus has handed the running of the empire to his former slave, who's now the emperor's chief advisor, he decides to have a grain shortage so he can be the savior. But he stored all this grain in places, and the grain shortage has caused the plague, and now with the plague he can't return the grain, savior, so he ends up getting killed.
I think I'm not sure whether it was until Diocletian's era that there was a kind of welfare state in ancient Rome, wasn't there, where a certain amount of grain would be given out to the poor, certainly the citizens of Rome at one stage.
That's how they kept the masses happy.
What was the phrase? Bread and circuses?
It was coming from Egypt, wasn't it? Bread and the games.
But, a timely moment perhaps to say that, and not for any moral grounds, but slavery was their undoing in the sense that, never mind any misery it might have been involved, though slavery in those days was quite at a different stage. Freeing slaves was a very fashionable thing for a Roman citizen to do, as you know. There were near on competitions to see how many could be freed amongst, when it was in fashion. And what do they call it? Manumiscence, when a slave is freed. And they're supposed to have a certain amount of payment set aside for his eventual freedom. So quite a bit different than perceptions. But with having all that very cheap labor, you only have to feed them, there's no need. And without need, there's no innovation. I saw a grain mill in France that was from about, I suppose, 320 AD, so quite late empire in a way. It was down a mountain, had 7 or 8 water wheels. Yet it was more of a novelty than anything else. We knew you had a lot of people. And it was probably even brought about because it was harder and harder to get conscripts or Shanghaied people into your armies by late empire. But without that innovation, can you imagine if there had been the need for an industrial revolution in, 500 AD instead of 1500 AD? Where would we be now?
Well, look where America is now. They've got 2.5 million slaves by way of the prison population. That's a record number of slaves if you look throughout history. And you've got black guys working on the exact same plantations as prisoners now they were working on before slavery was abolished.
Really? What were the well, perhaps Arizona was different from anywhere else, but in that prison, what were the prison industries as such? I mean, I don't mean the jobs cleaning the landing.
Well,
or
if you look at what
the
prisoners produce now in America, all the major corporations have signed on. Military equipment.
Oh, really?
All kinds of military gear.
How much do they earn in prison? What's the best wage?
Anywhere from 0 to 50 cents an hour.
Okay, so they barely enough to contribute to their commissary.
Well, before tobacco was removed and cigarettes were removed.
Is that removed everywhere in the US?
I think, I don't know, maybe they still have areas where you can smoke and stuff, but in some, each state's got different laws. But the prisoners just wanted mostly to get the tobacco and the coffee from that meager little income, and then they would do all that slave labor.
All right. I know prison wages are quite high in a Swiss prison, and yet they have a 70% foreign national population. When I was in Scandinavia, a prisoner, I remember I got ghosted there once, which we'll come to one of these episodes, and ended up in some small town. There's always these 2 Polish guys working down in the dungeons there for, I think they made about 120 euros a week, which was quite good money. I mean, they'd save it all up and they'd go home to it. But from what you're saying about the American system, it is kind of slave labor. What about the unions? Don't they object to prison labor on things that their members might be able to be doing?
I think they've crushed the union power, and the government contractors are so powerful now, taking advantage of all this slave labor, that they don't have much of a voice, to unions, against it. And it's all just, the legislators just sign it all in. And like the black guys, after they freed them from slavery, they put them on cocaine to increase their productivity. And the Mexican workers, they came in, they smoked weed at the end of the day to relax from their work. So by introducing drug laws, They were able to rearrest their own workers, and they left a loophole in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it says slavery is abolished in this country except for people convicted of crimes. So low-level drug possession and loitering laws enabled them to just rearrest all these people and get them working for free again. And then that's to this day. That's why you still got a disproportionate amount of black people in the U.S. prison system working as slaves.
I can see that. No, there are also what did they call them, the Jim Crow laws that made it very difficult for Black Americans to register to vote and to campaign or to become part of the political system.
Totally.
So there were many. I do remember reading an account of very early day, an observer watching how some of the southern states had a whole lot of black guys as elected representatives. This is before they worked how to rig it back to make sure that Whitey got back in power. Saying, it looked like he was very critical of it. The place was messy and raucous and didn't really get anything much done. But even back then, and this would have been 1870s, the journalists thought, well, it might be a mess, but it's kind of democratic anyway. But that was soon seen too, wasn't it?
And then the governors as well, they'll bring out some black guy from death row just before they're up for re-election, fry that person, and then they're guaranteed to get votes for being tough on crime.
Yeah, you can't do too badly. I mean, Trump is, I don't know why he's worried. He'll get re-elected anyway.
Have you seen the poll? It's gone even, hasn't it?
It'll have some sleepless afternoons or whenever he takes his nap, because it will look grim until the finish line, and I think he'll get over. But he's only up against Joe Biden, and really, people are funny, aren't they? Joe'd make perfectly good president. He's got enough political experience. He'd probably, but he is he's a Democrat, and there won't be overwhelming Democratic control of both houses because of the Republicans. People will kind of swing back towards Trump at the last hour. And I mean, the presidents can only do bad, can't they? They never do any good. The least worst. And how did he handle problems that have been thrown on his desk? Not particularly well. But then again, not entirely badly. I suppose it depends where we are in November as to how bad things get. If there's some turn of events which make it look like he's a complete bungler. But, Americans are quite religious in a way. Hand of God. They won't necessarily blame him for, people dropping dead or whatever befalls them. He will get blamed, on the other hand, if there's no jobs around. Even if they're gravediggers.
Because he had created record employment, hadn't he? They hadn't seen that low unemployment in decades.
Well, he's credited with it. Yes. Yeah. It's hard to say whether any leading politician created anything. They just happened to be there at the time. And probably if they'd slept through it, the same would have happened.
But now the mask has caused everything to be reversed. So.
Yes. Yeah.
If you want to see those episodes, they're on David's channel.
Yes.
So, okay, we've got
about
15, 20 minutes to go to get it to 2 hours. Do you want to continue with your story? Or?
Yes. I'll get to a certain point with it. I'd kind of declined on the offers of my own vassal state on the border of Afghanistan, which, and oddly enough, I preferred, I did look at the townships, which were, the cities around Pakistan, which I thought would be better options, and did look at a place that became famous that I liked, notorious at one stage, because it met the criteria. I was after some place that, when I was in Lahore, I noticed that Model Town, a suburb there, and Cantonment, which is originally where the army accommodation, were very neatly, I wouldn't say manicured lawns, but you can judge a street there in that part of the world by the amount of encroachment, as they call it. The houses are on both sides. They've built their houses out into the sidewalk, the pavement, and then onto the road. And suddenly there's only like a virtual broken pit of rock, which is a one-way road from a very generous two-road. But the ones that are still okay are the army-controlled ones. And I learned from Robbie the Scott's army friends and my own Air Force that they had a kind of different world there. Which had they like to live in a controlled way. So I looked at all the places that might lend itself to that. Lahore was good in an area, but it was maybe likely to bump into too many people there. I looked at Faisalabad too, which is a modest township. Interesting, it used to be called Lalpur up until 1979, when the name was auctioned off in a way to honor King Faisal of Arabia, who gave them money. But Lord Lisle had this town named after him. And if you land on the place, you can see the Union flag. The street plan is like that. And there's a statue of Queen Victoria on it. I tried to get the policeman to stand in front of Queen Victoria like that, but he was too shy. Would have made a nice snap, though. Interestingly enough, they don't want to pull down those old statues. They kind of, I wouldn't say they necessarily look fondly back on their history, but they do accept it's a fact that these things happened, and they didn't feel too badly about it. Well, their grandfathers and great-grandfathers spoke nicely about it. But I also looked at the other towns that were named after English people, and Abbottabad was one of them, and it seemed to have everything going for it. Never heard of it. Only a few flights in and out, but regular enough. And why? Because the army had big training colleges and things there, big family things there. Looked really nice. But I wasn't the only one who was looking for a quiet place to live at the time. Osama bin Laden moved in there. So probably he was going on the same basis, that you kind of live in plain sight, but you pick the part that's very much under control. Now, I'd also been speaking to the wife of David, the diamond dealer, because he still couldn't, his bail was being tangled up by Akbar Shah there. He wasn't getting enough money out of it. So, but I'd spoken to his wife. He had a couple of kids, daughters, that were really quite little. I think one was 7, the other one was 11 or something. They were coming. I recommended against it, but suddenly I had to find a place for where to put them. I didn't want to throw them into the pit of the center of Karachi, but through the army connections, a place that was recommended was it was actually built as an army club down by the beachside along the coast there, and then taken over as a hotel. But it was the Diamond Cliff Resort or something. But oddly enough, it was the best one there out of town. So I had to pick the girls up at the airport, David's wife, and then get them down to see him in court. The guy was still in chains. He could have had Beakley. He wouldn't let me. He was so nervous. He thought the man that had got him into this much trouble was going to get him out of it. And it was kind of hard embarrassing in a way, for him to be sitting there in chains at the courtroom as his little family have turned up. He was still under the clutches of this guy. So that was the situation to sort out.
Clinging to a pipe dream.
I had kind of lots to do. And I suppose the only other thing that people have followed it to this point, what about Nurjan? Well, I visited his little enclave out there. I went past the shipbreaking yards, stood around while he pretended to make some kind of business with him. Could get the smuggling opportunities were quite good and strong. I could get some pretty much as much hash as I wanted smuggled out of there. But here was the thing. I took one of the skiffs over from not far from the shipbreaking yard down there. Massive site, by the way. You imagine all these old cruise ships, cargo ships, oil tankers, all dragged with huge chains onto the shore while an army of people descend on the thing, rip the guts out of it, hack it down with blow torches. Quite dangerous work. And the town that was had grown up around this industry, their houses were all made of odd bits of fittings from these ships, sometimes the cruise ships. I went into one which had like an ornate staircase, but there were 3 people living under it. Another sort of refinements you wouldn't expect from there. But I found there was also a very kind of, and I had to be a little bit careful with Nurjan because he would try to please everybody at once. So he was running a bit of a still. He had a couple of guys down in the bottom making some. Or supposedly closest to vodka as you might want. Oddly enough, though, you can get locally made beer in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and whiskey and vodkas are all made by breweries licensed for the Christian community, and they had little bottle shops around there, which are kind of unmarked, but. Because their very existence was an embarrassment. And in fact, the Air Force guys that had helped with the moving into the penthouse had been rewarded with a few crates of beer that they were otherwise too embarrassed to go and get. But I think, given the time, rounding out that side of thing before we move on into back into Europe and building that can probably wait till we can put a good foundation on it to go on with that. I'm trying to think of since it's been a while. Have you heard from anybody who's had any questions that were outstanding? I've heard from people who have asked usual things that sometimes about things to do with smuggling, or people are very identity conscious at the moment. I noticed I did something on that a while back, how that shift has taken place, and I think people who find themselves isolated or whatever have had time to think about who they are and how they'll work.
I'll look on part 8 and see if there are any questions. Let's see.
Yeah. I think, what do you suppose it is that people have the idea that they want to walk away from their lives? I've known a couple of people who have done it. They've got up after dinner sometime and gone out to get a newspaper and never come back. And in 2 cases where that person's been found again, years later, he or she has actually built up a new life, but almost a mirror image of the one they walked away from.
We've got
Maybe they do.
this is part 9 today, is it?
Today's
The top comment is, ha ha ha, love this guy's story. Is there no end to it? I hope not. I just want to keep going forever with David.
Well, I suppose there is, and we have the next networks where I decided to keep everything small scale with a very select band of independent smugglers, and that involved going back to Christiania, which is in Denmark, and that place is. Have you ever been there?
Denmark?
Yeah.
No.
Well, in Copenhagen, there's a section of it called Christiania, and it used to be something. It's now a bicycle factory, but it has a whole lot of like counterculture hippie types that live in there. Used to have. It's got a pub in there. They're against hard drugs publicly, but they have Pusher Street, or did at the time I was there, which had a series of caravans. And it was quite good. It was the first, I suppose, before, now we've got, how many US states have now got recreational cannabis? More than 8 anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But this was before the regulated world, and it was a bit more fun. I used to get a few pre-made joints in little plastic containers that were made up, sort of a cone-shaped kind of thing. But it was more of a headache running those back to the UK in a funny kind of way than it was anything more dangerous, because it stinks so much. And the hash sellers there have about 5 different types. Something it probably was, when they call it Lebanese gold, I think it was very that light, granular sort of hashish, mild, soporific, something you could, an after lunch one, I'm sure. But from what it looks like, the way the US is operating, it's all kind of, it's less like a smoker's club from the 1920s or a tobacconist shop than a kind of Sweden Systembolaget, which is their way of selling alcohol. They're quite puritanical in Sweden. If you want to buy booze, you have to go into this grey corner shop, line up, fill in a form, tick what you want in wine and then spirits, and then you take your place. Next number, click, click, click. Your ID goes through there. They're all ID to hell over there, and you collect it at the other end. All brown paper bags go. I mean, it is like what I guess it's buying a recreational marijuana in Colorado. A bit boring. Sure, they've got a showroom, but part of the law is, of course, not to recommend anything other than as an alternative to this or that. In other words, they're not allowed to promote the use of the marijuana. But how can you distinguish between something without favoring one thing over another for different purposes, which in a sense is a promotion? I mean, whole thing is, I don't think it's legalized at a national level yet, is it?
Federals are still holding it as Schedule 1 substance, more harmful than cocaine, with no medicinal value whatsoever, because that's what the corporations want it to be.
So, I'll get back to that. But so even medicinal, so-called medicinal
with
cannabis,
no medicinal value whatsoever.
The feds say that that's all wrong.
That's what the corporations want it to be, because I think it was in the 80s, was it, that Reagan Bush made the universities destroy all research into medicinal marijuana, allowed one university to research marijuana, but could only research its negative properties.
Oh, really? That kind of really bends over table backwards the idea of research, doesn't it? Any outcome is supposed to be what you're looking for, whatever it might be.
That's what they were looking for, negative properties.
There is that. I always thought that if we had the last 50 years where bow to the inevitable, recreational drug use is a thing that would exist, the big pharma would spend quite a bit of money trying to tailor things up. So you'd be able to get reliable drugs.
Well, GW Pharma's got the biggest weed plant in Europe, and that's a UK company. Sativex, the spray and stuff.
But even when it comes to the more psychoactive drugs, I suppose when it comes to the things that produce a euphoria, there is no clear pharmacological research done between, say, that group of painkillers, which is euphoric, but only while they come into effect. 20 minutes later, you're kind of stable and then drops down after 2 hours. They've got a very short active life of about 4 hours. That's why when you're on a morphine drip, you've got to get that button a bit of a nudge every 4 hours. I tape mine down. That's the easiest way to go. But that group of things compared to you could call it the amphetamine group, then to the trippy side of it. Where's all the research on that? The distinctions between the benefits of how to feel good without. I spoke to somebody an expat who lives in Dubai the other day, and he said, well, we were on this theme, and he thought that just as well Coke wasn't legal, he'd be quite, he'd be spending a lot of his money on it. Admittedly, governments don't drop the price of drugs they legalize, do they? I mean, that marijuana in the US states is just as expensive.
Well, that's the thing. It's because of drug laws, you've got the inflated black market price, but they're all near worthless plants, aren't they, at the source countries?
But the legal marijuana is still pretty highly priced anyway. Yeah. But that will always be the case. Say we made a drug tomorrow, and in the UK, anything we make that's not listed as legal is now illegal. That's a crazy bit of law, isn't it? Saying that totally every substance that is mind-altering in any way or affects the CNS is against the law.
So that just hands it over to the black market who produces toxic substances.
Yeah.
Kids die because of toxic substances. They don't know what to get in.
And adults don't have a very good time. And it makes making choices extraordinarily difficult. The choice is never between yes and no. It's between what's it like, or how's it feel, or what are the long terms.
Well, Portugal sourced heroin and gave it to the addicts and got them off the heroin because they weren't afraid of getting arrested, and the health teams cancelled them off the heroin. And that was a very cheap way to deal with that because of all the crime around that drug and the cost of incarcerating people and policing all that and everything else. They saved a fortune.
As well, I in 40 years, I've known very clearly two kinds of heroin user. Those who stumble in and out of it because they're just messing around with it and they get themselves in trouble by getting a habit. But there are about, I'd say, between 8 and 10% of the whole population that are born just misery gutters. They are born unhappy. Their genes have left them with brain wiring that it's like depressives. They feel like a couple of people who've used to say, well, it's the only time I felt normal is when I was on something like that. But research about what it is about that, can you make something like that wouldn't be addictive? Would it be necessarily the end of the world if people were taking something or other to make themselves feel happier all their lives? Who knows? Because we do know that in 100 years, when the electrode implant into the spinal column is there for what they'd call legitimate medical use, to avoid epilepsies, to stimulate regrowth of damaged things, to do with paralysis, Parkinsonism, all of those. Somebody will say, well, while we've got all those little wires in place, try this little program I've typed out on the computer that processes, sends off the stimulus signal. You'll enjoy this one. So if the drug is a program...
That would certainly put vibrating nipple clamps out of business.
Well, I think for some people in their lives, putting aside the nipple clamps is a little overdue. A nipple was not meant to be clamped. And...
looking at the questions,
anything interesting?
The most commonly asked question is, when is part 9? These have just been coming in for months. I just got one the other day.
Just had it, really.
People are complimenting us on the blue spectacles. As usual, we get this comment, I think, on every episode. I could listen to David just recite the phone book.
Well, that's about all you'll get at the moment, because I'm quite busy. But by the way, there's a German version coming out, German fans, called Flucht, and Flucht I did. It's the old escape book, but I'm going to type it up.
My friends in Halle and Leipzig need to get on that. So one person saying these need to be at least 3 hours long.
Yeah.
One saying, David, have you heard Neddy Smith was on his deathbed in October but miraculously survived?
Oh, I thought he was gone. Neddy Smith was an Australian villain, various sorts, but pretty much a leech extortionist and complete informer, by the way.
Some people have misinterpreted Billy, the failed boxer, as Billy Moore and asking
no connection.
We've had Billy Moore on the podcast. Have you not seen that? He was in prison in Thailand. Gripping story.
What did you think of the film that was made out of his story? Interesting film, I thought.
It's good, I think.
Well
yeah,
made.
it's artsy, isn't it? But intense without the language.
Not
speaking and the language barrier.
Anything to do with only aspects of him, I would think. Inspired by, I think you'd say in that case. But it was
this question might cause a plot spoiler, so you might just we can exercise our right to remain silent on it. Ask him whatever happened to the DEA agent. Are we going to get to that in the story?
We are indeed. Last time Bill Schenkman was gloating over my still breathing corpse in Karachi, as I'd been arrested there. But now that I'm acquitted, he's trying to make it difficult for me to get a passport out of Dodge. The Australians offered one, but fooled around on it. And the British, well, they were dragging their heels too. But I didn't mind being in Karachi town, as you'll hear next time.
Have you had any dealings with Prince Andrew or other royal family members?
Not really. Extremely dull people who are people I try to avoid, really. Somebody, a friend of mine who knew them all well, said for the most part, they are kind of dull.
The mathematician David mentions was probably Andre Weil, who was wrongly imprisoned for spying in 1940. He made so much progress with his work that he joked he was going to have to arrange to be locked up to 2 to 3 months every year.
What, so that he could work more?
So he could make more progress on his work.
Who was it?
Cloistered.
Who was the questioner there? The respondent.
The questioner is Mathemagical 55.
All right. Not a regular one, I don't think, but...
Doesn't ring a bell, that one, does it?
No. The fundamentalist Christians have been stalking me. Have really eased up. I don't know whether they've been struck down by the wrath of God in some form. That'd be ironic, wouldn't it?
Did David vote for the trillionaire bankers and the Brexit con?
Did I like the Brexit? Well, I went public and said Brexit will never happen. And it seems that though other people are trying to collect on the bet, but the fact is we have yet to see anything that shows one change of operating procedure. And even though I don't think, I think it'll be the great British way of just ignoring the whole thing and going on as though nothing happened. Maintaining existing agreements, signing things over, it will be the same, except we won't be part of it. No MEPs anymore, and we'll have to pay the fees on the sly too, by the way, like Norway does.
Are you the David Attenborough of prison and life stories?
There we have it. In the wild, the novice smuggler. You can tell by his ragged jeans that he is ready to mate with the customs officer. I can see that. Well, it's less wildlife than a kind of, what would I think, a termite mound. Very developed. Evolution's left its mark.
When will David tell the Pakistan stories? It was good to listen to the 2019 casual chat, but itching to hear Karachi stuff.
Is that Samboy 666?
This is Philo F. Mofo Kang.
Oh, yeah, no, he's surfaced. He should let me know what particular, the whole comprehension of Pakistan was so difficult. You can imagine just from some of the things we said today, if you give money to this one, that'll disappear. Who can you get to do something? And it was only by this whole change of policy of not declaring any particular things and not paying for anything.
Elliot Benjamin wants to know what you think of this Churchillian quote.
Yeah.
Play for more you can afford to lose, and you will soon learn the rules of the game.
I quite like that one. Really, I suppose you have to define how much it is you can ever afford to lose on something. Let's say everything you've got is what you can afford to lose. It depends. For over this 40-year career, I always thought, doesn't matter if I walk out broke tomorrow. I think I said, I've told people about that one trip I arrived in Stockholm with not enough money for a hotel bed for the night, but cargo worth $500,000. Oh, and not a contact whatsoever other than a murmured deathbed whispering about such and such, who was a journalist who knew people. But as soon as I arrived there, I knew it was all right. So to have nothing was never really threatening.
Would you say that your wealth is inside you then? It is your knowledge, accumulated knowledge, and your health?
Well, health. I think the web of molecules that I've ingested over the years is quite a firm structure, but I never really, I wouldn't be working on a day-to-day grind as it was. They were quite I still like making things. I was like to a workshop.
Tonka Tanka has asked, David is a small man. How does he handle prison violence?
As a spectator. Sometimes ringside with the best seats in the house, I can tell you. I always try and get those. I won't go to any prison executions anymore. I decided that after the hanging in Karachi, when they had to put the sandbags on this skinny little thing around his ankles, and they had a row of them on the back wall there, from which they selected. I must say it did show some professionalism, though, to have different sized sandbags to attach to different ankles to get the right snapping weight.
Do you still have nightmares about seeing prison executions?
Oh, not that. But I wouldn't welcome anybody to my dreams. They're always set in a prison of some kind. But I don't often know it's a prison until towards the end of the dream. And sometimes one of them has had a glass ceiling where I climbed to the top of a building and found I was stuck under the dome of some science fiction series, I guess. They're always there.
You've got a hater here, Josh
Good.
NPK. When are we getting to the end of the story of him being arrested in Pakistan? I was pretty disappointed to see that this podcast contains virtually nothing of the rest of that part of the story. Unless I zoned out and missed it all. Doubt that, though.
Well, you've really got to we're at the end of the arrest in Pakistan, and now we're going on to further adventures as soon as I can get enough passports to get together and deal with the ambitions of the Air Force, the spook services, a couple of anti-narcotics agencies, and the women in my life that seem to stake their claim.
With nipple clamps. Truth or spoof was
Is
asked.
there any truth to this guy? Have you seen this? I mean, the photo Polaroids lying around.
Truth or spoof was asked. What would David change about how your actions adversely impacted or hurt other people?
Oh, well, yes, sometimes they, when they get rich, they buy a bed and it's less comfortable than their old bed. Or they buy a sports car and then they have an accident in it because they can't handle a 7-shift Italian sports car. And so it has inversely affected them. But I'm being glib about it, but anybody who found themselves in trouble over any of my business affairs could always come to me. And I'd find a solution.
Who do you want to play in your movie? Well, you already had one movie. Who was that played you?
Toby Schmitz, his name was.
Toby Schmitz.
Yeah, unfortunate.
Sounds
name.
German.
I don't know what he's doing these days, but he didn't shoot to fame in anything. But he's a good actor. Yeah, he's not too bad.
People can watch your movie on YouTube, I believe, still.
It's still around. I fell across it the other day, and it's not in terribly high quality there, but I'm not going to put it on my channel because it'd be. I mean, it doesn't take much to get a copyright violation from YouTube.
No, it doesn't.
Does it? So,
What's the name of your movie again?
The Man Who Got Away. It's part of the underbelly Australian crime series.
Is your Danny Dyer still on YouTube?
Probably is, and I think what I have of it, I'm entitled to use anyway. But
You're entitled to use.
I'm certainly entitled to use the bits where I'm speaking.
You should do a Danny Dyer dissection video.
What of him?
Where you show a little
over
clip
this.
and then you give your actual reality comment.
Yeah, or perhaps who would like to see how does Danny Dyer shape up as a smuggler?